At some stage this year, the government will have a comprehensive spending review. And the other great thing, and listening to Jesse this morning, was that he's up for it. He recognises that in some respects, strategic roads are sorted through the RIS and the money in the budget, and we've got a mechanism with the major road network, but there's nothing. There's no strategy for local roads whatsoever. So here's the opportunity where we can try and influence that process. And this is what this review is all about. And I think today what I want to do is share with you the feedback from the survey that we've been carrying out, where we put out some proposals and questions, because it's not just about me, it's about what you as an industry, what our members think are appropriate in terms of how we want to influence this process going forward. So what are the terms of reference? I think these are all the sort of aspects that we need to consider in terms of this problem and how we're going to try and resolve it going forward. And one of the key things is around condition, and I'll talk a bit more about all of these and this one in particular. We have a problem, we have a lot of evidence, but have we got the right information? Have we got the right data? Clearly, what we want to do is demonstrate the importance of the local road network. So this is 98% of national road network in this country. It's a massive part of that infrastructure asset base. And talking about productivity, this is essential for our economy. So it's really important. On the other side of it, it's got real social value. These are the roads and the way that people get to everyday public services, and that not just by car or bus, by walking and cycling. The other question is, have we got the right governance and management arrangements for these local roads? Is it fit for purpose? And if we do get more money, as I said to the Minister, are we going to make sure that we can deliver it efficiently and effectively? And clearly the big issue is about the funding. So there is not enough money to the extent with the revenue that some authorities are going bankrupt. So, this is a situation that is absolutely catastrophic in terms of the revenue money that goes to the day-to-day maintenance. And I've had some conversations with local highway authorities who are going to the statutory minimum. So, we can get lots of capital, but if we don't do that day-to-day stuff, then the integrity of the asset is going to be fundamentally affected. And we also want to consider, so, we can all ask for more money, but we've got to think about where that money comes from. And so we want to consider that suitability. And also, are there other ways that this money could be collected, or other ways that the whole service could be provided? So that's what the sort of areas that we've looked at, quite comprehensive. And I think, this is an opportunity to look at the cradle-to-grave process, not just to say we need more money, but, what else is going to be part of this process? So the questions that underpin all this is, why improve the local highway network? I suppose, that's a no-brainer in some respects, but, we need to consider that in this process and understanding what needs to be done and how that will be done, and trying to, the great thing that we can do from a CIHT perspective is say things that perhaps other organisations can't say, like ADEPT or LOTAG, because we have that degree of independence. We're not held any political constraint. We represent the industry quite broadly. So what things do we need to change? Well, clearly the status quo is not an option. We cannot carry on, having the road network deteriorate as it is, because it's just not going to be fit for purpose, and it's not going to help the economy and those social issues. And how should we govern it in the future? So the key themes are clearly about, and these are the sort of topics that we've developed a bit more in the questionnaire. How can we improve it? What information do we need to support it, and how can we change the approach and the governance reforms? I think every person, public service and business depends, as I've said, on the local road network. It's something that is vital to the economy. Sorry, I should be saying local highway network, as LHN is being used there. And it's we want to see it as an enabler, not a problem. At the moment, politically, it's a problem. And actually, it is an asset that actually will benefit our economy at a local and a national level. And on the back of that, we want to improve the service of that road network, rather than, every day, people complaining. It'd be great to get, people saying how good it is and how much it's improved. Also, I mentioned about the assets. So we have a reasonable idea about the carriageway assets and their condition, but outside of that, there's nothing that has to be collected at a national level. And that's a shame, actually, because we used to do a lot of this. So, and when we think about the importance of highway assets, it's not just about carriageway. Drainage is absolutely essential. The traffic management assets, the footways, and the wider things like safety fencing. And these are all things that are important to make sure we continue to manage that asset well and effectively. And it's important that we have the information about the condition and what the need is. So in the survey, and hopefully many of you in the room completed the survey, and I thank you if you did. And if you didn't, there's still a chance. We're keeping it open because we want to try and get as much information together as we can to substantiate our views as we go forward. So what I'm going to do with you now is to share the results of the survey as far as we've got to today. And I think the great thing is about this survey is that the mix of people that have filled it in is, say, industry-wide. It's a balance between people in the public and private sector. So this isn't a distorted private or public. It's a very balanced response. So the first thing was around funding. So I've already talked about the funding. Now, the revenue's a disaster and capital not so bad. Oh, how did that move? Thank you. Things are moving behind me. Right, so we asked these questions. One was about ring fencing, and anybody that works in local highways will recognise that, if they can keep the money that they get, whether it's from DFT or locally, into the service, then, that means that they've got more ability to secure that funding and make sure they can make best use of it. The second thing is about this revenue and capital conundrum. Now, strategic road network, they don't get separate allocations for capital and revenue. They get a single, what we call TOTEX funding, a single budget. So why can't we have that for local roads? What's different about strategic roads that we couldn't have for local roads? Because then we'd know what the total budget is, and then we could more effectively manage and deliver what we need to on the infrastructure. The problem is we might get 3-year horizon on capital funding if we're lucky, and revenue, local highway authorities, you don't really know what you're going to get 1 year to the next. And that causes all sorts of issues in terms of good asset management, but also the operational delivery on that network. So good support from the survey for ring fencing and pretty good support for the TOTEX consideration. When we look at the alternative funding streams, then a bit more mixed views, I think. So one of the options was some pay-as-you-go funding. Now that can be quite controversial politically, because if we talk about some sort of tax for travelling, whether that's fuel tax, hypothecation, or some sort of vehicle charging, that is very difficult politically. But in essence, we need to know where we're going to get this money from. And again, I keep harking back to what happened with strategic roads and the major route network. For the first time ever, Treasury allowed a hypothecation for vehicle excise duty to fund those two road networks. So what's different about local roads to those roads? Why can't we have a local road fund that has some specific way of generating the income to pay for to support the maintenance and management? And there are models in other parts of the world that we can look at that do this quite successfully. So, and the other thing was about utilities. So there was an announcement yesterday about utilities, which was welcome, but actually it's not going to make a lot of difference in my view. And I think this is going a lot further to say, and I don't know, Roger Elfrick, are you here? Yeah, Roger will be very pleased I put this one up. So the long-term damage report, 15 years ago? And we all know that utilities affect the integrity of the highway network. So they reduce the life of the road by about 30%, and yet the utilities don't pay the true cost of the damage they incur. So why shouldn't we say they should pay more? And that's another way of generating some of the income. And none of these things will be easy, but we need to make the case, and we need to demonstrate why we need to do this. In terms of the road fund, we touched on this, but I suppose this question could be looked at in two ways. Should we have some money out of the existing fund? And I think in some respects I agree with what Jesse Norman said. We ought to look at it separately for local roads, because if we start taking it from the other pot, then that could detract from some of the benefits that we're going to have on the strategic and the major road network. And the other question we asked was about longevity. So at the moment, capital about 3 years, revenue annually, as I said. Now, we all know that if, to do better asset management and manage that road network more effectively, we want clarity and longevity. And there are some brilliant case studies around this. You know, the Blackpool model of prudential borrowing. You know, PFI has a bit of a bad name, but in some places, you know, the clarity about the long-term investment means those places don't have the pothole problem. But in the survey response, which was very encouraging, that everybody agreed generally that we should have a minimum of 5 years. And I know DFT are supportive of that as well. So, you know, if we can try and, you know, achieve that as part of this process, that will help everybody in this room that's involved in managing local road infrastructure, because it will give you the clarity of your budget and your ability to get better efficiency through your supply chain. So, the other thing is around condition, as I mentioned, and what do we need to look at in terms of how we change that. I think one of the problems that we've lost in terms of having the performance measures that we had, and I'm not suggesting we recreate a whole generation of performance management systems, but you know, 9 out of 10 of the respondents said that we need a more standard approach to collect data. Because if we're going to try and make the case at a national level, you know, we can't work off different data in terms of the information that we need. There's got to be a degree of consistency about how we present that data. And, you know, I say the tragedy is we used to have this and now we've lost it. And I'll talk a bit more about some of the assets where, you know, there's very little information available that we can use. And the other thing is, you know, the backlog. So, you know, the Asphalt Alliance do a brilliant job in terms of getting information out, but the trouble is, you know, it may not be that accurate because different authorities will provide that information on different bases. And I think the other thing is, you know, we need to try and think about, you know, what sort of backlog is going to be deliverable. So coming up with very large numbers isn't always helpful in terms of actually what's needed to ensure that those networks are safe and serviceable. But again, we got a lot of support for this, and some of these things aren't anything new. So just sort of focusing a bit, and this is quite a lot of detail on this, but I'll talk you through it. So we asked the question in the survey: do local highway authorities have sufficient information on the condition of their assets to benefit users? And for each asset, we've got like 3 bars on there. One is good knowledge, one is limited, and one is poor. So for classified roads, as we know, because there's a national indicator, we have really good information. Structures to some degree, because there is a national indicator in that respect, and bridges. And then we're pretty good on street lighting as well. And then you look at some of the other assets, which, going back to the point I made, are really important for the user, but also to look at the overall management of the highway infrastructure. So classified roads, we used to have a national indicator. Unclassified roads, we used to have a national indicator, and now we don't have anything, and some authorities don't really do much measurement on that network. Footways, again, a really important part of the highway asset for people, pedestrians, and again, very limited information available. Similarly, drainage and cycleways is pretty poor. And then if you look at where we have poor knowledge, the one that stands out most is drainage. And I think, you know, we're all aware of that. It's the hidden asset, but it's really important to support the integrity of the highway infrastructure. So we need to know more about that in terms of the overall problem and the investment we need. So what do we need to change in terms of this? Then starts considering the governance issues. So if we did get more money, then how can we make the case to say, well, if we got that more money, could we ensure that we delivered it efficiently, effectively? And 98% of our respondents said it's useful that government should consider changes. So that's just a general support, I think, more for the survey in its entirety. Now, this is quite controversial, and I think, you know, we've got to think about what that means in practice. But the vast majority of respondents said we need to reduce the number of highway authorities. And this goes back to the point you may have heard me make before, and certainly I did in the select committee, that if we had a blank sheet, a canvas, we would not have 153 organisations managing local roads in this country. It's just, I'd say madness, but it's just inefficient. So how can we look at how we would recast that and try and think about what changes we could suggest to try and make it more efficient? So on this slide, we asked about the different models in terms of those delivery arrangements. Again, there's quite a lot of detail here. But our first one was, and we asked people to rank them as first, second, third, and fourth. The first one was, could we do more through voluntary collaboration? Now, that's something that I've taken the lead on in this country. And, I've done my best to support collaborative alliances, but we've never really been successful in highway maintenance. So, I think that isn't going to happen. The next one, perhaps, is where we want to think about a bit more, is about having existing highway authorities formally linked with each other's. And, we can consider the options about how that might work, but particularly in areas of combined authorities where there is a new geography taking shape. And these combined authorities are taking over certain highway powers. And could you develop that thinking into something more to get those efficiencies over those conurbations, where in certain parts of the country you have many district councils that are managing highway networks in a small geography and have very small highway networks to look after. The other one is to say, okay, let's just not look at local authorities level sizes, but just say, if we came up with an optimum size of a network and then tried to redraw the map, what might it look like? And then finally, if we move to a regulated asset base, so this is moving in the direction of the utilities, and that, if you wind the clock back 20, 30 years ago, all your public services were delivered in the public sector, and now those utilities are in a private sector model where there's an income stream and they're privately sector managed and delivered. But the key thing is not so much who delivers them, but they've got an investment stream, which means that they can carry out good asset management and renewals. And the one that came through is the highest contender here, is this one, where 65% put that as a 1 and 2 preference, that existing highway authorities formally link within the combined authority areas, for example. Now, the question is, how can that be achieved? And I think, statutory change will be really difficult. But there may be a mechanism, and looking at some form of incentivisation to take this a stage further and encourage that joint working. So, the governance is about the consideration about looking at how we can create more efficient and effective highway areas. And there's part of this work, and I'll talk a bit more about that, there is a clear evidence base to say that obviously, and most of you in the industry will recognise the economies of scale in terms of the benefits you'll get. There's all sorts of other issues about the politics, but all these things can be overcome, in terms of some arrangements that could take place. And some of these things are happening anyway within the combined authorities where there's joint arrangements. The other thing that we wanted to do was just put this in the mix, really, because the Highways Act is now about 40 years old, and if anybody's ever tried to use it in terms of some of the powers, it's really difficult, it's not up to date, and it could do with a refresh. And then finally, the point I made is about looking at the NERSWA legislation and saying, can we go back to the utilities and try and get a better compensation level for the damage that's created on our local road network. So, one of the things I'm quite keen for you today is to think about some of these changes and just get your views in terms of what you think. Some of this is going to be at the radical end. Some of it actually, we're pushing an open door, and we know that with DFT. So, it's how far we can get with this. And, what type of models or what type of arrangements are going to be fit for purpose. In terms of the next step, so it's very easy to sort of make these comments and say what would be good to do. Achieving them can be quite challenging, but the other thing is we need a good evidence base to support them. So if we are going to promote something, we need to demonstrate why it's worth making that change. And the next phase we're going into now, and we've already been working on this, so having completed the survey and got a pretty good idea of consensus around this, how can we now start underpinning that? So we're working with a number of organisations, and we're working with ADEPT, NHT. So ADEPT around the financial arrangements in terms of looking at what the revenue situation is, and that's very complicated. So Mike Cadell-Jones is here today. Mike, where are you? So Mike's been helping us, and we're going to launch a survey pretty soon. Yeah. So Mike's going to help collect more information about. One is about what revenue funding there is, how much it's been cut back, but also trying to get a better handle on the implications of those cuts into the integrity of the infrastructure. And again, when we talk to DFT, they just didn't have this sort of information. So hopefully we can support the case, because the whole reason for doing this is to help DFT in their conversation with Treasury, like we said this morning, in terms of supporting the case to get more investment in local roads. NHT and HTMA, we're looking at this sizing aspect, and they've got a lot of information. Obviously, the contracting side have been bidding on larger and smaller contracts. They know the economies of scale on that size. And NHT have done quite a lot of work around looking at how smaller and larger authorities perform. And I don't know if Steve's here. Are you here, Steve? No, he was here this morning anyway. So RAC Foundation, they have a lot of data about the implications of poor condition on the road network, whether that's through information through insurance claims of vehicle damage. John's here as well, and talking to John about, I know John's very supportive of the TOTEX consideration. There may be other things that we're not quite supportive on, but I think we want to try and see where we can work together. So it's important that we talk to all these people. I put the subnational transport bodies because I think they've got a better handle on the geographic changes and the powers of the combined authorities, because they're already working in that environment and they've got an appreciation of some of the changes. And if we did want to try and push this, how that could happen in practice in terms of the current joint arrangements that are in place. So the whole idea of this is obviously, as I said a few times, there will be a spending review. The problem is it's a bit of a moving target because we don't know when the spending review is because of all the political uncertainty. But it's generally expected there will be a spending review in the next 3 to 6 months. So what's really important is we can complete this report, get the evidence together, and go and have a conversation with Jesse Norman and do all we can to help DFT promote this and get a better sustainable funding for our local road network. So for those of you who haven't completed the survey, we'd be delighted if you would, because I think the more information we get, the more credible our case will be made. And if any of you have got any specific information that you think would support what we're trying to do, then we'd be really only too pleased to receive that from you. We do have a working group. I said Mike Dow-Jones from ADEPT. We have representatives from HTMA, Steve Gooding from the RAC Foundation, Ginny Clark is on the review team as well. But there's a lot of work to do to try and get this completed within those timescales. So that's all I've got to say. Hopefully, a lot of that made sense, but it'd be great now to just have a bit of a Q&A around what you've just heard, and I welcome any questions. And I might sit down, actually.
I'm calling Mr. Kumson from Transport for London.
Okay.
I think one of the areas that we are looking at the moment is in terms of parking and loading on our network. So if you go to the borough roads, most of them have got pay and display. But on TfL network, we've got basically free parking and loading just to support businesses. But at the moment, we're going towards a situation where funding is cut for TfL. So I think that's an area that we would like to explore to get some funding to maintain our roads going forward, so that at least we can also cut some losses, actually. And I don't know how people feel about it, but I think that there's a study going on in terms of parking and loading on the TLRN.
Okay, yeah, so, damage to footways through, heavy vehicles parking and the whole issue about the urban road network is quite challenging. I think the London situation is different to the rest of England because of TfL in some respects. But I think, the issues in terms of what we are trying to promote, are very relevant to you in London. And I think, the basic premise is there's not enough money, and how can we put a case forward to try and secure more money. And maybe in London, going back to what I said about the number of highway authorities, that's an issue as well. And, is there scope for greater collaboration in terms of getting these economies? And, I think on the side of that, it's important there's greater standardisation as well.
It's going to be a better throw. But
Oh, you dropped it.
Hello, Matthew. Peter Molyneux from Transport for the
Peter.
North. I can definitely see the need to do something now,
Yeah.
but I'm just wondering whether it's a missed opportunity in terms of future funding streams. So if we, as we suspect, move to more autonomous vehicles and pay at point of use, and as duties fall away, is there a need as well to start putting some pointers into future funding streams about how you will pay for the use of that autonomous vehicle and how that will start to feed back? So I'm just wondering if you're doing this great piece of work is to start putting some feelers out for the future funding.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point, Peter. I suppose, we're sort of reflecting a bit the here and the now because that's where the problem is. But I think we need to think about the future. And, when you hear Uber and other organisations start talking, you realise there's, different influences and that might create different opportunities. So it's something we probably need to pick up in some way. And I think that's a point very well made.
I know, Matthew, you're aware of some of what I'm about to say. I think probably all of what I'm about to say, but I thought I'd like to share with the room as well. In the context of gathering better data, as you know, we've been championing that for a long time and trying to share that data in a rather more appropriate and helpful way. There are a number of projects that the UK RLG Asset Management Board have got on the books at the moment that I encourage everybody in the room to watch out for. If I can do a very quick plug for two, which are slightly less data linked, but I think will be very useful for local authorities who are struggling with the new codes of practice. One of them is around an asset management competence framework, which we're about to launch, and the other is around highway inspector training and competence, which again, very relevant to new codes of practice. But the one I particularly wanted to flag was the work we're currently doing on a for DFT and supported by DFT on State of the Nation, which is about our transport assets, in particular our local roads, obviously, given the nature of the work we do. We've gathered a lot of data, and thank you to all those in local authorities who've contributed your data. One of the big challenges has been getting that data in a consistent form. And we are looking at the moment, and we'll hopefully be publishing in the next few months, that State of the Nation, looking at how our roads are, how healthy they are, struggling with some of the old chestnuts, like how do you calculate backlog? What is a fair measure of backlog? What does backlog look like? This is intended, hopefully, with DFT support to be an ongoing process, and one of the things that we would like to do is to be able to build on it, look at how it can better serve the industry, possibly make it a single clearing point for some of this condition data, network data, and all the other things that we keep being asked for, and we keep having to share perhaps in different formats to different surveys. And hopefully, I think that would help move this debate forwards. And I was just I wanted to flag that up, but I also wanted your thoughts on that and how that might contribute and how we might contribute to the further work you're doing to sort of bring about some changes in the industry.
Yeah, it very much reflects the point that we're making about getting a better handle on the data, and certainly DFT have commissioned the work that they're undertaking. So, they are already on the case with this in trying to get better information about what the current condition is, but also some consideration about what's needed going forward in terms of monitoring that condition and using that as to provide evidence base for the funding as well.
I think there's a lot to be welcomed in the study, Matthew. I think it's got to form part of a broad-based approach to DFT. I think anyone in this room is big enough to step beyond the politics, beyond any single organisation in terms of ADEPT, LOTAG, tagged nationally, and CIHT, to be able to provide a single and coherent view. I think there are certain key messages that are massive. The issue about better data, I don't think anyone could deny that has got to be the single biggest issue in having a coherent and constructive conversation, not so much with DFT, but with Treasury, in terms of the need. It's interesting, the conversation about Uber, because there are just in the way mobility has been transformed, the way in which we survey our road networks have been transformed. State-of-the-art systems and video capture now are totally revolutionising the conversation that takes place with every single councillor and every single cabinet member. I don't get many cabinet members coming to me and saying, oh, can we scan our road again? Can we get scanner out again? They do want to be able to see visual imagery that can have a meaningful and informed conversation about the asset. It's interesting you put the NHT survey up there because there is a massive disjoint between the fact that our classified road network, on the one hand, has never been so good, but public satisfaction has gone the other way. We need to get inside of that, and part of that is TOTEX. So for that reason, again, there's a massive conversation to be had on that, and we welcome it. There's one area that I guess there's a bit of a dichotomy because you rightly focused on Blackpool. A wee while ago in your presentation, the £30 million that Blackpool spent was predicated on state-of-the-art intervention, local thinking and consideration, use of systems like GAST to inform a really, really powerful conversation. That's saving them 150 million quid over 25 years. In that respect, that is a small and perfectly formed and mature local highway authority, just as Derby is, just as Bradford is. However, that's not to say that the issue of governance does not need to be reviewed, but I just sense caution that if we go in there looking for something, we may find something, whereas actually if we go in with a null hypothesis, we might then better understand whether or not the 154 highway authorities that there will be from 1st of April, when one highway authority splits into two, whether or not size is as relevant as being able to scale up through the supply chain and having mature clients within local authorities who know how to commission for outcomes as opposed to just commissioning for something that used to be off the shelf that sadly predates HMEP and all the work that you did there.
I think the other point that I perhaps should have made, which I didn't, it's not just about the economies of scale, but there's a big issue around resources. So again, if you look at the metropolitan areas, there's just not the skill base now to support all those individual authorities. And it would make a lot of sense. And I know in some of the metropolitan areas, there is a pooling of some of that technical expertise to provide a better resource base to retain that skill and develop it and make sure it's fit for purpose. So, this isn't just about the economies of scale. There are other underlying issues that will help to support these geographic areas deliver a more effective service.
The thing I wanted to mention really was that there was a photograph you put up earlier of a bit of deteriorating road. It was quite clear it had a trench right across the centre of it, probably deliberately chosen, but it was the case. And there was also the damage on either side. So all that really supports both the surface damage and the deep-seated damage caused by utility work. And as you know, but perhaps everyone doesn't, the TRL spent about 200,000 on research paid for by the old CSS, DFT at the time, and TFL. And all that work was very well thought of at the time and suggested a charge for every opening that utilities make. And the legislation exists. All the information that's provided with that is in support of that. The only thing it needs is regulation, and that needs support from DFT. And that's the thing that hasn't been available up to now. So I would hope that you're pushing that quite hard. It's not a massive proportion, but it's a significant proportion of the total cost of reinstatements. The other point is that we did present evidence to the Transport Committee, and I sent some in myself on that. And I haven't had much feedback, actually. I don't know if you have any response on these particular issues.
Oral evidence sessions have been televised, Roger. So you can, I'm pretty sure I raised it with them, but I raised a lot of things, but I think you can hear that I did raise that. So quite how that will feed through, because the select committee is still, inquiries ongoing. I think we've got another 2 oral sessions before they report back. So just for those of you who don't know in the room, the Transport Select Committee are doing a similar piece of work around some of the issues that we're discussing here today, and they will be putting a report to DFT and government and their views. And I think, there's one or two people in the room here that have given evidence, and I think a lot of it is very reflective of the things that we're raising here today. So hopefully, again, it will just reinforce the messages at a very important time, really. I think the other thing about utilities, I mean, if there was a charge, they might think twice about putting the service down the middle of the road. So, because it would be cheaper to put it in the verge, and at the moment, there's not really a lot of incentive not to do that. So, yeah, that's right. But, I think, we're talking about the need to find more money. The political difficulty will be that all our utility bills will go up. So, but then if it's not utility bills, where else is the money going to come from? That's the challenge, really.
In reality, it is going to be quite difficult to rationalise 153 highway authorities. There's big political and jobs issues there. I was wondering, what would be your offer to, say, a combined authority to encourage them to take up the idea of moving from, say, in Manchester's case, 10 to one highway authority? I mean, we've had devolution deals. Would you be able to, I mean, there's one suggestion that you give, say, Greater Manchester TOTEX, and you say, but in return for TOTEX and a kind of growth deal, you have to go from 10 to 1, because there's got to be some incentive for them to go through the change, hasn't there?
It'd have to be on some sort of incentivised basis. So if there is more money and you want that money, then you're going to have to do something different to get that money to demonstrate you can make the benefit. So
follow
and
up
that would
question.
be in a similar vein that the city deal or the combined authority deals operate like like it or not. You've got to have a mayor or you ain't going to get this money. So I'm not quite like that, but you get the gist, I guess. Yeah.
Sure. And follow-up question: what would be the legal side to that? Would it require primary legislation? Because obviously there would still be the statutory highway authority. How would you transfer that responsibility?
Well, I think if it's by collaboration, then it can be by agreement. So I think that it could be done without going through too much formal change. But I mean, it's something that we're going to have to consider, in terms of how we articulate this in our report. So I'm not entirely sure at the moment quite how that could work in practice. I think at the moment we're just sort of considering the principles rather than the detail. And that's why we want to talk to some of the people from the combined authority who can help advise on this. Okay, so I don't know, I'd like somebody to put their hands in there and say they support this, but I mean, what do you support if you did put your hands in there? What I'd say to you is, how many of you completed the survey? Oh, right. So please, can you contribute to the survey if you want to support this, and it will give us a better ability to support the case because we'll have more people, signing up to this. I think the other thing that's been really good, which I didn't share with you, is that there's been lots of individual comments. So rather than just saying, we think this is a good idea, they've actually said why. And I think there's a lot of material there that we can use in support of the final document. Okay, right. I think that's where we end. We've got another panel session coming up. So you've got probably about 3 minutes, but perhaps we can delay it a bit for a quick comfort break. So thank you very much. And I'll perhaps clap myself, or you can.